History is a lie told by those who refuse to look up. While we track our progress by the invention of the wheel, the steam engine, and the silicon chip, the archive suggests we have been under the lens of a celestial microscope for over 13 millennia. In the winter of 1899, Nikola Tesla, a man whose mind seemed to vibrate at a frequency different from the rest of humanity, sat in his Colorado Springs laboratory. He wasn't looking for radio waves from Earth. He was listening to the heartbeat of the universe. And then he heard it. A rhythmic, repetitive signal. It wasn't the chaotic static of a solar storm. It was numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. Tesla was frozen. He later wrote that a feeling of terrifying awe came over him as he realized he was the first human to intercept a message from a non-human intelligence. But Tesla was a man out of time. The world called him mad. They didn't realize that he hadn't intercepted a signal from Mars or Venus. He had intercepted a status report, a ping from a Sentinel that had been parked in our polar orbit since the end of the last ice age. The archive contains reconstructed notes from Tesla's private journals, seized by the Office of Alien Property after his death. In them, he describes the signal as intelligent, yet cold. He calculated the source to be moving at a speed that defied any known atmospheric phenomenon. It was orbiting, but not like a moon. It was active. Why 13,000 years? In 1973, when Duncan Lunan plotted the long-delayed echoes of these signals, he found a star map that pointed directly to Epsilon Boötes. But the positions of the stars in that map were wrong for the 20th century. They were perfectly aligned for the year 11,000 BC. Imagine the implications. While our ancestors were barely beginning to transition from hunter-gatherers to the first agricultural societies, a civilization from a star system 103 light-years away had already placed a monitor in our sky. They watched the flooding of the Mediterranean. They watched the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. They watched every war, every plague, and every discovery. We weren't alone in our evolution. We were a project, and the Black Knight was the silent recorder, capturing every heartbeat of a developing species, waiting for the moment we became interesting enough to report back. The 1950s were not just the era of the Cold War. They were the era of the Great Awakening. In 1954, 3 years before humanity successfully launched a single gram of metal into orbit, the United States Air Force was thrown into a state of silent panic. New radar installations designed to detect Soviet bombers began picking up ghosts, massive, fast-moving objects in polar orbits. President Eisenhower was briefed in total secrecy. The question wasn't if they were there, but whose they were. The Pentagon initially suspected the Soviets had achieved a technological miracle. The Soviets suspected the Americans. But when both sides realized they were equally baffled, the true terror set in. If it wasn't us, and it wasn't them, then the sky was no longer empty. The Void Archive has access to the dark fence logs from 1960. The Navy surveillance system detected a black, light-absorbing mass weighing an estimated 15 tons. To put that in perspective, our most advanced satellites at the time were the size of a basketball. This was a titan. Then came 1998. The Space Shuttle Endeavour mission STS-88. For a few brief moments, the veil was lifted. High-resolution cameras captured a jagged, obsidian-colored structure drifting against the horizon. The images are haunting. It looks less like a machine and more like a fossil, a piece of architecture from a civilization that builds with materials we cannot name. NASA's official explanation, Object 16407, a lost thermal blanket, is perhaps the most insulting cover-up in the history of spaceflight. A thermal blanket does not weigh 15 tons. A thermal blanket does not maintain a stable polar orbit for decades. A thermal blanket does not emit rhythmic radio bursts that match 13,000-year-old star maps. Today, in 2026, the Black Knight has gone silent. Or so they tell us. But as the mega-constellations of thousands of small satellites fill our orbit, the perfect hiding spot has been created. The observer hasn't left. It has simply blended into the noise of our own creation. Some inside the archive believe the Black Knight is no longer just a recorder. They believe it is a relay station, and that the signal it sent out when we first detonated nuclear weapons has finally reached its destination. If the Sentinel has been waiting for us to reach a certain level of technological maturity, then the silence of the last century is about to end. We are no longer the children Tesla heard in 1899. We are a species that can now reach back. The question is, do we really want to know what the Black Knight has been saying about us for 13,000 years? Archive File 02, The Black Knight Satellite. Final conclusion, monitoring continues. Stay in the light, because the shadows in the sky are moving. End of file. If the Black Knight is a sentinel, then it has a way of making itself known at the most inconvenient moments of human history. The archive contains a peculiar file from 1963, centered around Gordon Cooper, one of the most decorated astronauts of the Mercury program. During his final orbit in the Faith 7 capsule, Cooper reported something that wasn't on the mission flight plan. Over Australia in the pitch-black void, he saw a glowing, greenish object rapidly approaching his spacecraft. It wasn't a star. It wasn't the reflection. It was moving with intent. The tracking station at Moochea, Australia, confirmed it. They had a solid radar return on an object that was pacing Cooper's capsule. Upon landing, Cooper was ready to speak, but the protocols of silence were already in effect. NASA officials told the press that Cooper had suffered from hallucinations due to high CO2 levels in the cabin. But the archive remembers the truth. A hallucination does not produce a radar return. A hallucination does not pace a spacecraft at 17,000 miles per hour. Cooper spent the rest of his life hinting that he was not alone up there. He knew that the Black Knight wasn't just a passive observer. It was a shepherd, watching its flock play with fire in the orbital heights. In the late 60s, a secret project under the codename Blue Book Extension attempted to triangulate the origin of the radio bursts. They found that the signals intensified whenever we conducted high-altitude nuclear tests. It was as if our violence was a trigger, a signal to the Sentinel that the species below had reached the critical threshold. We have declassified logs of Soviet cosmonauts from the Salyut missions who describe seeing a dark, crystalline shape that appeared to absorb the light of the sun. It didn't reflect the stars. It was a hole in the universe. One cosmonaut, whose name has been scrubbed from official Soviet records, claimed he heard a voice in his headset, not in Russian, not in English, but a series of mathematical pulses that felt like information being forced into the brain. The Black Knight isn't just hardware. It is an interface. It is a bridge between the cold intelligence of the stars and the fragile minds of men. And every time we try to touch it, the government steps in to burn the evidence. What if the map discovered by Duncan Lunan wasn't a greeting? What if it was a tombstone? The star system Epsilon Boötis, which the Black Knight allegedly points to, is home to a dying sun. If a civilization sent a probe 13,000 years ago, they weren't looking for friends. They were looking for a new home, a plan B for a dying race. The archive suggests a terrifying possibility. The Black Knight is not a monitor, but a land claim beacon. It has been waiting for the Earth to reach a specific climate, a specific level of atmospheric carbon, or perhaps a specific level of technological infrastructure that they can eventually occupy. In 2026, we see the sky becoming crowded. We see militarization of space. We see lasers, kinetic harpoons, and satellite killers. But the Black Knight remains untouched. No nation dares to shoot it down. No nation dares to even approach it too closely. There is an unwritten law in the highest circles of power. Leave the Sentinel alone, because we don't know if it's still sending signals or if it has already triggered the final phase of its mission. Look at the images from 1998 again. People see a piece of space junk, but in the Void archive, we see a key that has been waiting in the lock for 13,000 years. The ticking Tesla heard in 1899 has accelerated. The pulses are becoming more frequent. We are no longer looking at an anomaly. We are looking at a deadline. When the Black Knight finally decides to speak, it won't be a radio signal. It will be a transformation of our world. The archive will be the only thing left to tell the story of the species that lived under the shadow of a night and never realized that they were the prisoners, not the masters. This is the end of the file. But for the observer above, the story is just beginning. Archive File 02, the Black Knight Satellite. Status: active. My name is your channel name. You have been listening to the Void Archive. Don't close your eyes. The stars are watching back.